Hello and welcome to the Anorak Review Show with your host, the Anorak. There are a lot of bands out there that are not exactly easy to define or pigeonhole into simple music genres and styles. 10cc is probably no exception. Are they prog rock? Are they pop rock? Art rock? Sophisticated pop rock? Well, today we're going to take a look at an album of theirs with How Dare You. And right off the bat, the cover art is very interesting. As you might guess, this was done by the late great group Hypnosis, who have done a lot of iconic covers for many great bands such as Led Zeppelin, UFO, and of course Pink Floyd. The cover seems to depict what seems to be a couple arguing over the phone, and this lad here on the back does kind of remind me a bit of Pio Folker's Columbo, which does kind of make it amusing to me at least. And the best of all about this cover, it's a gatefold depicting several people on the phone talking to each other. And considering today's climate with a lot of social technology and everyone discussing things over the phone, this does seem kind of, I don't know, relative. But enough of all that, let's talk about the actual music itself, each going through the songs as you might expect. We begin the album with its titular track, How Dare You, minus the exclamation mark, an instrumental track written by Lol Cream and Kevin Godley. This track definitely sets off this album with its rolling drum percussion and somewhat funkish guitar that remind me a bit of Alan Parsons and Mike Oldfield. It then ends with a very feel-good and chill-out piano riff that does give you an instant satisfaction. I do love this opening track. It's worth the start to this album. Next is the song Lazy Ways, a euphoric, almost motivating song that talks about, being lazy and helpless and useless, how you'll never get up if you don't get up, or how you'll always stay down if you sit around. I think it's another one of those songs that I think a lot of people, such as myself, would find quite relatable. It's worth a listen if you're feeling down or depressed and just need a bit of a boost of confidence. I Wanna Rule the World begins with a very sinister marching drum roll that gives off a kind of intimidation before it spins into a somewhat humorous tone about this outcast who wants to get back at the society that looked down upon him and wants to rule everything his way. And then it spins into a kind of dark humor with kitty winkies and tiny tots and armored buses and weapons and all that. It's almost kind of self-aware in a way, and whether it's political or not, I think I'll leave for you to decide to see if that could be the case or not. Then there's I'm Mandy Fly Me, which is quite optimistic compared to the previous tracks, even if barely. It's about an old homeless person who looks at a poster of a stewardess and dreams about his life being saved by her, which is actually inspired by an actual event from one of the members of the band, and it does kind of tell a story about having affection for someone who may not even exist. It does have that kind of feeling to it, if you know what I mean. You're wrong. The first side of the album ends with the song Iceberg, a somewhat jumpy, bumpy, if not almost kind of schizophrenic kind of track, which I suppose kind of fits since it kind of deals with schizophrenia, what with its singer singing about how they were belonging in a crazy home yet not belonging there. There's also a bit of a mention of heavy breathing on the telephone, which is kind of referenced by the album cover, which will probably be something of a recurring theme as we'll see later on. With its sporadic vocals and its somewhat jointy Hammond organ, which is a bit reminiscent of those kind of honky tonk pianos. It's a very somewhat avant-garde piece that ends with a very slow, deep laughter, which almost sounds like the chortling of a pig, which may kind of fit that kind of lunatic atmosphere and attitude. The second side of the album opens with the song Art for Art's Sake, a very funky, groovy track which kind of reminds me a bit of Pink Floyd's Money, both the bass line and its lyrical content, talking about money, being rich, having all the things you can afford, and that recurring phrase of art for art's sake, money for God's sake. It's another really good, catchy track, which is definitely worth a listen. Next is the song Rock and Roll Lullaby, which is a very fitting title for this one. It has a very slow, rhythmic guitar and percussion riff that does feel reminiscent of those classic 50s rock and roll kind of songs. Its lyrics are about sending a child to sleep and rocking by them as they kind of drift off into a kind of sleep. If you parents out there are into this kind of music, I recommend listening or playing this song for your kids, your like very young kids. I'm sure they'll love it when they grow up. Next is the song Headroom, another very chill out groovy track which talks about the experience of someone going through love and romance and sex for the first time and trying to adjust to it, trying to get used to what may come of it. It's another good, very nice, groovy kind of track if you like the kind of stuff. The album itself ends with the song Don't Hang Up, which I would call a kind of tragic comedy kind of song. It tells something of a story between a couple going over a divorce, one begging the other not to hang up over the phone. It fittingly opens with a telephone ringing, much like ELO's telephone line. It does have a kind of somewhat downer tone to it, which I think people would, especially older people, would find very relatable. It's also probably the longest song of the album, going at about 6.25 minutes, and that's quite something. It's definitely a closer to go out on the album. The song itself eventually ends with it ending abruptly with a kind of buzzing tone, as if one of the people actually did hang up. It's actually a kind of fitting conclusion to the song and the album overall. And finally, we come to a bonus track which sadly wasn't on the album, but was the B-side to the single Art for Art's Sake, and it's called Get It While You Still Can. To me, that's sort of an epilogue to the album. It's more uplifting and optimistic. It talks about not letting things in life and the future pass you by. Don't miss those opportunities. Take them if you wish to. If you really want to, go and take them if you can. It really is a good motivator, and it's also probably the shortest, barely reaching about 2 minutes and 55 minutes. So it's quite a short but still very catchy one nonetheless. Overall, How Dare You is a very underrated album from a very underrated band, and is worth a listen to anyone who wants to get into this band. If I were to have any nitpicks, it's more to do with the copy I've got in particular. You see, the actual vinyl LP disc I have has the kind of labels on them kind of swapped, I assume by mistake. So the side one circle label is on the second side, and the second label is on the first side, which for me can get pretty confusing. I don't know if it's just my copy, or was this a recurring problem for a lot of these copies, but I'm sure if you managed to get a vinyl copy of this album, your luck is better than mine. But overall, this album is worth a listen, and I highly recommend it. Next time, we take a look at a more well-known album, and one by a very equally well-known band, something rather more tricky and taily.